is itself shown to have relied on scientific evidence which, to say the least, is suspect. Has it become respectable to question some of the basic ideas behind climate change? Polly?
Well, it's very alarming. Just as the world was beginning to be persuaded that something had to be done, suddenly here's a get-out clause for all those people who didn't really want to do anything, and whether they had specific interests, oil interests or whatever, or whether they regarded it, which they do in lots of places, as a left-wing conspiracy to make people pay more taxes and have more state control. They've now got, they can say, look, these scientists have been cheating. The truth is that everybody who knows about this stands exactly where they did. All serious scientists say, all right, that was a disgraceful thing to do, but the underlying evidence is so overwhelming that nothing has changed. All that's happened is we've given some ammunition, foolishly, to the other side. But public opinion in this country, anyway, in Britain, is noticeably shifting towards a position of saying, well, perhaps there's nothing in it after all.
It's only about a quarter of people who think that it's really as serious as we thought before, and quite a few people just think, well, maybe...
But the real danger is that you cannot do anything about it without popular will, because you have to do such difficult things. People have to change their own lives. It is very hard for democratic politicians to make people do that. You need kind of 80% support for that.
We already saw the detrimental effect of these dodgy dossiers, shall I call them, from the UN about climate change at the Copenhagen summit, which ended in a disaster. In no decision, governments participating took note of the results, but they didn't agree on anything. And I think, therefore, I would suggest we move away from clear...
No, they didn't disagree on the science. What was good?
They didn't disagree on the science.
Chinese and everybody else who'd been obstructive, Americans, they all agreed, at least.
Yeah,
on
I
the basis
suggest
of
talking
science.
about how to influence public opinion. We should concentrate on the science, and that is not going to help the Earth's atmosphere if you continue with our emissions. Never mind about the dates. It's very difficult to predict the future and so forth, and clear-cut dates by which year, for example, the Himalayan glaciers will have disappeared. That was a foolish thing to put a date on that. But to keep reminding people, if we go on in our ways of adding more emissions to the atmosphere, that is a prescription for disaster.
Could I suggest, Jeff, that the environmental movement itself, in all its diverse complexity, has caused some of its problems for itself, because within some sections of it, to talk of, quote, climate change denial, as if this is Holocaust denial, and to pillory people who question those ideas, has been a mistake, and it's caused a degree of resentment. And also the sort of philosophy that we've all got to put on hair shirts, we never can go out of the doors, you've got to eat, lentils, otherwise the entire planet is going to die, is a problem.
But I think, with all due respect, that's the tabloidization of the environmental movement. And in some ways, I think this is, by even talking about this, you're giving a kind of credence to what is junk science. I think Polly is right. The overwhelming scientific consensus is that climate change is real, it's man-made. The fine points may be difficult, but here we are talking about, oh, it's the environmentalists' fault for making us think that they might have to put on a hair shirt. Modern environmentalism really doesn't do that. They're talking about intelligent ways of trying to keep all the privileges and the energy that we have and just do it smarter. And of course, it's going to take some changes. But as the Stern report said a few years ago, if we make essentially the investment of the equivalent of 1% of GDP now, we'll avoid the possibility of very serious dislocations 20 or 30 years from now. That's just a prudent thing to do. It's like buying an insurance policy. What's so hard about it? It just takes a little bit of leadership. I feel that a lot of this way of, it's shocking to me how effective these scare tactics have been in moving public opinion. It's wrong. It's what actually makes me worried about modern democratic societies. These are hard decisions. It's the worst kind of decision. It's a long-term problem that comes in the future.
It's something democracies can never do, that this is going to require such a huge shift, at least of investment, in terms of public investment, that it's more than democratic leaders can manage.
The Chinese are now the world's biggest producers of wind turbines. I mean, they know what to do, and they'll
because they take decisions.
They'll break eggs and make the omelet, and we've got to do that.
That point, Jeff, is really what I want to touch on, is that there's a lot of technology that does exist already that could help start to reduce a lot of the emissions, which is not being pursued by many governments, which could be at this point. I mean, if the Chinese are making a lot of these windmills and cars that are hybrid cars already exist, how come governments are not pushing further? I think a lot of corporations that still make a lot of money through polluting are still resisting some of this, and many governments are not going after some of these corporations.
We need a fixed high energy price, which
tax.
then makes it worthwhile having windmills and things that are more expensive ways of generating clean energy. And unless we have a universal world price, fixed price, higher price of energy, we're never going to get these things built.
But it's not just companies, it's governments. I juxtapose what you said that we could do with companies to agree to reduce the required energy with what happened in Brazil. Brazil decided last week to build a new hydroelectric plant in the middle of the Amazon rainforest, which will lead to more deforestation of 500 square kilometers of forest, of rainforest, which leads in turn to more emissions of gas. And that's a government which, prides itself on being forward-looking, progressive, and so forth. And suddenly it puts a lie on all these goody-goody assumptions, what government should do. They decide on a hydroelectric plant which will lay waste to hundreds of kilometers of rainforest. So what you do with that, that will encourage people again to say, there you are, if Brazil comes to that conclusion, obviously this climate change problem is not such a bad one after all, otherwise they would know better.
Well, or maybe it's just despair. There's nothing we can do. In Britain we only use 2% of the world's. Anything we do is such peanuts and leave it to everybody else.
But we all can say that, can't we? We can all say that.
Yeah.
Well, you get a project like the carbon capture and storage experiment that they're trying, it's at a standstill right now. It's not being pursued because they're saying it's going to take too much money to finish that project. Now, if they started it, and many governments agreed to put money into this project, that's something that could be pursued even further. There are companies that I've heard of that can actually capture emissions from coal production, which produces the most emissions out of all technology, and turn that coal, actually the emissions from the coal, into fuel. And that's not being pursued. I'm just saying there are technologies that exist that could be pursued further that are not being backed or
the politics
financed.
of this, as you know, you used to be based at the White House. You've got Barack Obama, who's under siege for his health care last year. He knows that climate change, if he pushes very hard on it this year, will alienate some of the same people in an election year. It's very, very difficult for governments to sell this. To go back to Polly's point, it's very difficult for democracies to do this.
I absolutely agree, and to that extent, 3 cheers to the people who managed to mess up his life so well by finding one error about the Himalayan, ice packs, and making a gigantic issue out of it. I feel here we see it this week over Toyota. It has a problem with its accelerator in one place. Now the Prius might have a terrible acceleration problem, and they're recalling those too because the news media is attached to it. But there's something funny about our herd instinct. This is hard stuff. I mean, the thing that you always feel good about Obama is he's a smart man. He goes through very carefully. He's thinking through these long-term problems, and then he's stuck back in trying to get the ball 1 inch down the line. And there is something very difficult. It is the media's responsibility, and it's lots of people's responsibility to try to do a better job explaining to the public these hard long-term problems.
Okay, the media explaining science. Now, there's a topic. We'll do that some other week. That's it for Dateline London for this week. We will, I hope, be back next week at the same time. Goodbye. Yeah, I was good.